Thank you very much, Michelle, and I'm really happy to be here and excited to see so many people here interested in learning more about the RDCA-DAP and what we're doing. So I've got about 10 minutes here where I'm going to try and do a high-level overview of where we've come in the last year since our launch last September and where we're going from here. Both Michelle and Teresa have done a wonderful job of introducing what the RDCA-DAP is. But to reiterate, it's a neutral, independent data collaboration and analytics hub to promote sharing of critically important data across rare diseases, with the goal of accelerating both the understanding of disease progression and optimizing clinical trial design. And I like to reread that statement regularly to remind people that the goals are really twofold, both sharing data and helping people understand and analyzing data to turn that data into knowledge, with the goal of optimizing drug development in multiple ways. So this is the image that Michelle just showed of really what the whole process is. And I'm going to take you through just the levels of progress and what we've been thinking about throughout the whole process. So I think Teresa already mentioned that we have now got data in from 40 different rare disease data sets. And those are from 10 different disease areas. Some of these are disease areas we were already working on prior to the launch of RDCA-DAP, and some of these are brand new data sets. But it's been critically important to get those early data sets in to start us off understanding what we need to do for the next phases to make that data as useful as possible to the community to really accelerate drug development. Because as we bring data in, we obviously need to curate it, understand it, make sure we understand different data types that we may not have used before, and make sure we have the appropriate standards to understand and standardize that data to make the data as searchable as possible. Again, with the whole idea of making sure the data comes in isn't changed, but as useful as possible and as usable and searchable as possible so that we can answer those critical questions. We've changed our thinking in the course of the year about how we tag the data, how we search the data, how we make it available to make the data really findable, searchable, and usable across the interface so people can answer questions of all sorts of different types, whether it's about the progression of one disease or understanding a biomarker or outcome measure across diseases. And of course, we've been using all this information to develop the platform and the basic analytics platform, which we'll be telling you a lot more about later. And at the same time, we've been doing some pilot analyses and figuring out the optimal data governance to ensure that people are willing to share the data with us in the first place, while at the same time, people can access the data and use it at the other end. And of course, all of this work has required working with the community. We don't have all the answers. You, as the rare disease community, have most of the questions and most of the answers. So throughout all of this effort, we've been talking to hundreds of stakeholders to understand what you need from the platform, what you may be willing to share with the platform, your concerns, your thoughts, how to make this as useful to the rare disease community as possible. So taking each of those steps of the process, we've talked to a lot of different groups across the whole ecosystem of rare disease drug development, patient groups, industry groups, academic groups. And those numbers are just the numbers that I personally have spoken to one-on-one. And through NORD and our collaborators at NORD, we've also presented to hundreds of people at scientific meetings, patient group meetings, webinars, really trying to get the message out there about what this platform is and to hear from people what you need. We've also been talking to a lot of groups around the world that collect and integrate rare disease data as well, because we don't want to compete with other groups doing the same thing. We want to collaborate. The last thing in the world we need is 7 different groups across the world, each with their own silos of data, their own data standards that can't talk to each other. So we've been talking to all kinds of people around the world about what's already being done and how we can interoperate with existing projects and projects that are being brought online now. And in the second half of the meeting, you'll hear from some of those groups. We brought in 13 data sets specifically for RDCA-DAP, not related to other rare disease projects we're doing. We have about another 30 agreements under review. Plus, of course, we're working with our colleagues at NORD around the IAMRAD platform of data and many, many others. So there's been a lot of time and effort spent in trying to understand where the landscape of the rare disease world is now, where the data is, and how we can be as interoperable as possible with other efforts. At the same time, within our data collaboration center, our data scientists have been working really hard on figuring out what the base platform needs to look like, where it's best to locate it, how to make it as user-friendly as possible, developing the processes for curating and standardizing data, how the data needs to be tagged to make it as searchable as possible. And my colleague Amanda Borens will talk about some of this next. None of this is trivial because, again, data is just data, and we want to put it into a platform where it can be turned into knowledge and really accelerate drug development. And that, I think, is what's special about this project. At the same time as all of that, we've also been working on a number of pilot studies, and these are projects in specific disease areas to try and demonstrate the endpoints of what this sort of analysis would look like. Projects which will demonstrate what the platform will do in the end, even while we're still building those innards of the program. So we're going to be talking about a number of those this morning, so I'm not going to go into them in detail now, but we've been exploring things like how to harmonize and explore data across different disease areas where perhaps different variables have been collected, but similar variables. So we've been looking at polycystic kidney disease and kidney transplant data to really demonstrate how you can make that data searchable, harmonized, and usable. We've been building some detailed disease progression models, looking at biomarkers and polycystic kidney disease. And then we've been looking at some of the registry data, very different type of data in phenylketonuria to understand what we can learn from that data in comparison to the clinical trial and natural history data that we've looked at in other studies. And we've just started to dig into some Friedreich's ataxia data to look at an outcome measure to, again, really understand changes in an outcome measure over time. So these are really important pilots that will demonstrate where we're trying to get to with the platform, which we hope will then feed back to the community so people will understand what they might get out of it, encourage sharing of data, and really help us move this forward. Because without the influx of data on the far left of our diagram, we can't get to these actionable rare disease drug development solutions on the far right. So that's what we've achieved in year one at a very high level. In year two, of course, we're going to go to the next step. But the most important part of year two is the initial launch of the platform. Right now, we've been bringing data in, we've been standardizing it. We can even share it through individual disease platforms, but the actual analytics platform will be available early next year. And there are some images at the bottom of the slide here of what it's going to look like, where you'll be able to explore data sets, explore the metadata, understand what data is in there. And then once you have access to the patient level data, you'll be able to go into much more detailed analysis to understand dynamics of outcome measures or biomarkers or progression of a disease or correlations between two endpoints or whatever your question is. And that's what we're very actively building at the moment. And at the end of the meeting, there'll be a video available, which you'll be able to take a look at and see what that's going to look like. In addition, of course, year two will still be about data acquisition. It always will be, I think, because we're never going to have an answer to everything all at once. So we'll continue to really be looking to acquire data from the community, work with the community to understand what they need, develop those processes for curation and standardization and sharing more standardized data back to the community. We're already working on what the feedback to data collectors will look like and what they want to hear back from us to improve future data collection. And we really want to continue to build these partnerships with the other data platforms out there to make sure we're all using the same standards, that we're all sharing data, whether it's through actual data transfer or federated data access, to make sure that all the data in the community is available to all the people who need to be able to use it, at least insofar as their consent is offered and data security can be promised. We'll also start looking at new data types. At the moment, we're mostly looking at natural history, clinical trial, and registry data. But as we move into year two, we'll start to look at some new data types and how we can handle those types of data as well. And of course, I always have to emphasize that we want feedback from the community all the way through. We can only do this as a part of a rare disease community. We can't do this alone. So we need to know what drug development tools are needed, what analyses you need, what data you have, and what your problems you have with your data, so that we can adapt our system to answer those questions as well as possible. And we'll be talking about a lot more of that as we go forwards. So in summary, we've done a lot in our first year. We've really taken what was originally a really interesting and good idea and started making it actionable. We're really excited to be able to launch the first iteration of the platform fairly soon. I think it's going to be really useful. We still need huge amounts of community input in terms of sharing data, understanding what you need from that data, so we can build out more and more analytics to make it as useful as possible. But I think we've come a long way in year one. We're really excited to share with you where we are now, and we're really looking forward to the next year and the next phases, which I think will get even more exciting.